All right, my name is Kendall Justiniano. I am a marketing director at Poly1 Corporation. It's a plastics company headquartered in Cleveland. My talk today nominally is titled The Trader Principle, Accelerating Your Influence and Impact. I'll start off right off by saying, one, I'm not an objectivist intellectual or academic. I am somebody who lives his life, at least to the best of my knowledge, according to objectivist principles. And I think I apply them fairly well in the topic of today's talk, which at its fundamental is trade. I'm going to start off by violating the first rule of good litigation and asking a question I don't know what the answer is going to be. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the word trade or trader? Somebody give me a business. Stock market. Anybody else? Handshake. That's an interesting one. All right. Yes? Mutually beneficial deals. Somebody's reading ahead. Good. Yeah. International trade. The flow of money across international borders. Well, in fact, and this is pretty common, I find, in the culture, the common conception that we have of trade, and at least most people grow up with, is this idea of sort of a mere exchange. Right? You give me something, I give you something, blah, that's a trade. And you can see how people would arise at that kind of conception. You know, we do this every day. You walk into the pharmacy, you go down to the aisle and get a bottle of shampoo, you go to the counter, you hand the guy to it. It's one of the first, hand money to the guy and walk out with it. You know, it's one of the first things we teach little kids how to do as far as trading is concerned. And the reality is that can lead to a popular conception of what trade actually is. And that's this idea, somebody said a little bit of the stock market, but that's this idea of, you know, when we do this in the pharmacy, we don't think about, you know, how'd the shampoo get there, right? What's the guy behind the counter doing? Why is he there? Why is this company even here providing me this shampoo? And so a common conception of the way men associate with each other is, look, hey, this is just transactional. I'm out to get mine. Everybody else is out to get theirs. And if I get mine and you don't get yours, I don't really think about it very much. Okay? In counter to that, there's another misconception or conception of how people interact with each other. And that one says, hey, look, no, this is not a dog-eat-dog world. We look around and we see all sorts of situations where people behave in cooperative fashion and they're on teams. And what they're doing is they're sacrificing their own personal desires for the good of the team. I'm sure some of you have heard this at least once or twice. Okay? When I first graduated college, I actually was susceptible to both of those conceptions of how men dealt with each other. And if you put those together and you're in a really bad mood and really frustrated, you end up with something that looks like everybody else is out trying to get theirs, and I'm the one who's sitting here sacrificing for the team. And if you look actually throughout the popular culture, this sort of motif, this idea that I'm a lone struggler against a cruel world of dog-eat-dog kinds of scenarios, is a lot of what you see in the motifs of the culture. You can think of James Anderson, Neo in the Matrix movies. You can think of Dilbert cartoons. Anybody remember the Dilbert cartoons? When they first came out, I had a visceral, ugly hatred of those Dilbert cartoons because the way they portrayed the world is there's this terrible corporate screw-up kind of world that I live in, and I'm just a helpless victim of it. And sure, we laughed about it, and there are some truths to organizations, and that's kind of why it was funny. In fact, the first time I read The Fountainhead, and if you could put the slide back up for me, the first time I read The Fountainhead, this is how I envisioned Howard Rourke. Okay? This lone struggler in a cruel, cruel world, fighting as hard as he could. A very stoic place. And it actually took me a very long time to figure out that this was not Ayn Rand's conception of the world or how men dealt with each other. And I have her basic response. She said that men deal with each other, and she said this in a very generalized and very fundamental way. All human relationships in a rational world are trades. And I'll read it to you. She said of a trader, he does not treat men as masters or slaves, but as independent equals. He deals with men by means of a free, voluntary, unforced, uncoerced exchange, an exchange which benefits both parties of their own independent judgment. And she said this is not just about a business thing. This is all relationships and all exchanges between men. And this is the governing principle of how it should be. And you can see she's already thinking a little bit differently about her conception of trade. She's already thinking about an exchange which benefits both parties. She's already thinking about a voluntary exchange. And the fact that the benefit that I derive has to be something that I find from my own judgment of the facts. And many of you aspire to things. Maybe you aspire to build. In order to build something like this, you might need workmen, you might need designers, you might need financiers to help you make that a reality. Maybe you're an artist and you aspire one day to perform and teach for other people, to make your living doing that. This was one that got me when I was first coming into the professional world. There was nothing more beautiful in my mind as a chemical engineer than the sight of a large petrochemical complex at night. I still get goosebumps. I go places. I used to have a park in my town where I started working where you could go. It was called Overlook Park. You could go see the plant at night. I used to go there just to sit and watch it, just to sit and look at it in awe. And I wanted to build these kinds of plants. Or maybe you conceive of a supercomputer that you can put in your pocket. And in order to make that a reality, you're going to need designers and engineers and manufacturers and financiers to help bring it to the world. And in fact, if you look at Apple, there's 100,000 employees at Apple, all dealing with each other, all trading with each other in order to make this a reality. If you go back even farther and you go back to the things that make up an iPhone, you go all the way back to the metals that were mined and the oil that was pumped from the ground and the materials that were created from those and the parts that were created from those and the assemblies that were created from those that go into it. You're talking about probably over 1 million people involved in this thing coming to reality. 1 million people trading with each other, within their companies, with other companies, in order to make that happen. And now I'm one of those people. I kind of sit down in the materials chain. I work for an industrial company that sells to other industrial companies. And part of the reason I'm so passionate about this topic is because I spend 98% of my life entering into the kinds of trades that Ayn Rand conceived of. And so for me, it's visceral, it's real, it's almost obvious. I'm like Neil Armstrong looking back at the moon, saying, well, yeah, it's round. When a millennia earlier, to be able to say that was an incredible feat of abstraction to do it. And so that's what I want to do today. I want to try to demystify this a little bit. I want to try to provide you some frameworks around a more rich conception of trade and the fact that it's something that is accessible to you. So, I've divided the talk up into a couple of parts. The first one, I'm going to provide you a framework. You'll see why I call it a Sudoku in a second. So let's go back to the shampoo example in the drugstore. A lot of people start with this conception of trade. You heard Alex, if you were in Alex's talk yesterday, you heard him talk about the first time he tried to conceive of what he wanted to do and the kind of product he wanted to offer. And he simply conceived of it as, I go into the drugstore, I put up a shingle, I put up a website, I tell people what I'm going to offer, and then I sit back and wait for the calls. That is not a good conception of trading for you to think about as you're starting to design your trade. So I want to blow this up a little bit. So if you think about the shampoo example, The actual trade, me walking into the store and getting the shampoo, giving some money to the clerk and walking out with it, those are a set of actions, and nominally they are the exchange that happens. But the question is, I'm not buying shampoo just to have shampoo. What am I trying to do? Right? Maybe I noticed the other day that I got some flakes on my jacket. I'm trying to find a shampoo that would get rid of dandruff, and so I'm looking specifically for that. Maybe I've got oily hair and I need a particular shampoo that will make my hair look a little less greasy. Right? That's actually what I'm trying to achieve by walking into the store. The fact that we're doing things as part of this exchange implies that we have some sort of capability to do those. Not everybody can necessarily do everything here. In the case of the shampoo, the drugstore has branches open. Maybe some of them are near my house. They staff those branches with trained clerks. They have buyers that go out and source materials, source products that they're going to put on their shelves. They make decisions about what products they're going to put on their shelves. They put those on their shelves. And then they decide how late they're going to stay open. Those are the capabilities of the store. My capabilities are, obviously, I live in my house. I might have to drive. I've got a car. I think I might need a little bit of money. Okay? And then finally, the question is, this outcome, this thing I'm pursuing, this lack of flaky hair or oily hair, what is it in service of? What is motivating me to achieve that particular outcome? Okay? Maybe I have a date tonight. I better not have a date tonight, unless it's with my fiance. Maybe I have a date tonight, and I really like the girl, and I want to make a good impression. And the other aspect is, we have lots of things that we're pursuing in our lives. What is it, where did that particular pursuit fit within my hierarchy of values, right? Maybe the date is really, really important. Maybe the date is not so important. Maybe studying for the test next week. Which one? Okay. So this provides a different view of that shampoo trade. Something that rounds it out, that gives all the factors that are necessary for it to occur. So instead of conceiving of the trade as a mere walk in the store, pay my money, walk out, imagine if you had a personal style consultant. You're getting ready for your date and your personal style consultant comes over. And she looks at you and she says, look, I know this date is really important to you. I know you really like the girl. I notice that you have some flakes on your shoulder. Maybe that might not make a good impression. Do you have a car? Yeah, I got a car. All right, well, I know there's a drugstore just down the hall or down the road. I think they're still open. Why don't you drive on down, give them a couple bucks. I know they carry a couple of really good dandruff shampoos. We'll come back here and get you cleaned up. Okay? That's the conception of a trade that you need to think about. Okay? So, if you think about these elements, they're all necessary for a trade to occur. All right? If I'm not particularly motivated about my date, I may not even enter into the trade. I may not decide not to go down and get shampoo. All right? If the drugstore doesn't have, that's motivation. If the drugstore doesn't have the shampoo, it doesn't matter if I go down to get it. I can't obtain it, right? I can try to execute a trade, but I will simply fail. That's capability, right? Without the capability to execute those actions, you don't have a trade. If the shampoo doesn't actually get rid of the dandruff, right, I'm not going to succeed in the whole reason I went down to get the shampoo in the first place. So these all become necessary elements to having a good trade, right? To having a trade that's actually going to work out for you. I won't say that they're sufficient, and especially as you get into much more complex trades, they may be very complex, but these are necessary elements that you need to think about. Can you see already when I conceive of the trade like this, that I start caring about the other person's motivations and capabilities. I'm already starting to think win-win. All right? Why am I starting to think win-win? Because if the other person can't or doesn't want to or isn't motivated to be part of the trade, they don't have to be part of the trade. And I won't have my part of the trade. Okay? So this is a real fundamental framework. The other thing that was the biggest aha for me when I first became a seller and started to learn about selling, and Alex mentioned this a little bit yesterday, selling is not about pressure. So, do you see anything in this model? Go ahead and put it back up. Do you see anything in the model about, here's my fantastic product, here's why you should buy it? Do you see anything there? Selling is about finding matches. Selling is about finding the people who have the needs for the products or services that you're trying to provide. And when they have those needs, and they understand that they have those needs, you can execute a trade. Now, the other thing, that was a big aha for me. That changed my conception of selling. And as I watched sellers who actually did that in sales and marketing, this is what they cared about. They cared about their customers. They cared about understanding what their customers' needs were. And if they saw that there wasn't a match, they didn't try to push it. Right? It's a very weak and very sort of immature seller who does that high-pressure stuff. All right, I have a couple of other really important points on this one. So here's an interesting trick. In order to get a trade to occur, ultimately, if all these things are in place, somebody's got to make an offer. I have a lot of people who first start off and say, well, how do I put together my offer? How do I think about how I pitch this person? And if you were paying attention, I just pitched you. Right? What is an offer? An offer is bringing to light the things that you see that are involved in the trade that are necessary for it to occur, and asking the other party if they agree and if they are interested in the trade. If you want to think about putting together an offer, and we've done this with some of the Strive leaders, take this framework and script it. Look at my offer again, and we'll go back to the consultant example. I know that this date is really important to you, motivation. I notice that you have some flakes on your hair, or on your shoulder. Do you want to get rid of those? Outcome. Do you have a car? Capability. I know of a drugstore down the road. I think they're still open. They carry some shampoos that could help you. Capability. Why don't you go drive down, pick one of those up, come on back, and we'll get you cleaned up. Outcome. I'm sure the store would be happy to take your money. Motivation. That's the offer. Right? This was an amazing aha to me. It opened up the world of selling, or the world of marketing to me, and that's ultimately where I decided to make my career. This is all that trading is about. Finding matches, and when you have a match, make it known that there's a possible opportunity, and would you like to be a part of it? Okay. Got a couple of more really important points. So now we're getting to the Sodoku part. People who are good traders, people who like trading, run this framework all the time. They just run it in their heads for fun. Anybody do something fun on a plane? Anybody like puzzles or crosswords or Sudoku? You just do something mindless? Come on. I know. Look, I play 2 dots on the plane. You guys got to do something mindless out there. If you want to be a good trader, start making this your new Sudoku. Okay? So Haleli and Kirk and I were sitting outside yesterday in the hallway, and we basically started talking about what each of us does. And you know what? We couldn't stop talking. And you know the kinds of questions that we were asking each other? Well, what kind of customer buys your products? How do you think about putting this together? What kinds of capabilities do you have to be a consultant? or to write book summaries? What is your customer looking for? What motivates them? Before we knew it, 30 minutes had gone by and we had other things to do and we were still wanting to stay there talking, right, guys? When you understand and when you see the importance of trading and you say, hey, look, I want to learn how to do this, you start playing around, especially when you start seeing that you can actually be an effective trader. If you put the diagram up one more time. Does anybody have problems when you get into sort of networking, cocktail hour, mentoring discussions? Anybody not always know what to ask? Come on, really? Yeah. I have just given you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The only 9 questions you will ever need ever again to have a really interesting conversation with fascinating people. That's the right slide. Why 9? Well, because the you and them I also, right? What do you do? Oh, that's interesting. What kind of customers buy that product? Really, why did you decide to do that? What motivates your customers to buy that product? What is it that they're seeking? What kind of outcomes do you have? Right? Oh, what kind of capabilities do you need to be able to do this kind of line of work? And can you tell me a little bit about actually what you do on a day-to-day basis? There's 30 minutes with any person just if you run the Sudoku. Right? If you want to learn, this is what I found as a marketer and as a business strategist. If you want to learn any business, how it works, go sit down and talk to anybody in that business and ask them those 9 questions. And then talk to somebody in one of their other departments and ask them those 9 questions again. And you will slowly build up a really good picture of how a business works. That's not just a business. It's any organization. It's any group of people. It's any single person. Right? If you start getting curious, if you start thinking in this sort of trader mindset, you start running this scenario over and over again. Are any of you interested in, being an innovator or an inventor or some sort of creative field like that? Got at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't ever come up with an idea for a product without thinking about the trade that goes along with it. The trades, who would buy it, why would they buy it, who would finance it, who could I get to come work with me? The people that I know who are really phenomenal traders run this thing all the time. And they don't run it because it's some chore. They run it because it's part of what they do and they understand the value of trading and how impactful they can be once they learn how to make really good trades. Last observation about that model, and you don't have to put that one back up. This model scales. Okay? If you learn how to make small trades, you are training yourself to learn how to make really big, hairy, audacious trades. It doesn't get any different. It might get a little more complex, but it doesn't get any different. I was in a customer meeting on Friday. It's an aerospace customer we're looking at developing a supply position with. And we met for 4 hours trying to develop a working framework for a relationship. This is all before the money starts changing hands. 5 hours we met. What do you think we did for 5 hours? We ran the Sudoku over and over and over and over again to understand what we might be getting into, what the contingencies might be. And it was literally nothing than, okay, I have an idea for a product. Let me throw it against the wall. How would that work within our framework? Oh, we would view that product like this. That's our motivation. And we would behave in this fashion, and this is where we think the outcome would be. Okay, I understand that now. Somebody else chimes up. Okay, well, what about this situation? Oh, all right. Just literally talking about nothing other than that Sudoku. Okay? If you start practicing small, you're already setting yourself up to practice to do big. All right, I want to talk about the problem of knowledge in trading. This half of the equation, you know pretty well. You certainly know what actions you're prepared to take, and depending on the level of self-knowledge that you have, you ought to know pretty well your capabilities and your motivation. Now, that's not perfect, right? I'm sure you've all been in situations where you start off on a project and you realize a little bit later on, A, it doesn't quite fit into your value system the way it thought, and you've got some other things that might be a higher priority, or B, you thought you were capable, but maybe you weren't. Okay? But in general, you know this pretty well. For sure, you know it much better than you know the other side of the equation. So the other aspect of trading is that you have to engage in discovery, right? You can hypothesize the other side of the equation, but the reality is you don't know what the possibilities are until you go out and find out from the people themselves. Alex talked yesterday about not actually knowing until you make some phone calls and actually talk to some people that you're going to trade with. This is true of any trade that you make. Okay? So you must be committed to discovery. Discovery takes time. That was the other thing I learned when I got into sales, is I thought selling would be fast. Selling is slow. It takes time to do this, time and effort. But the reason that you do it is because the outcomes and the collaboration that you get are way better than anything you could do on your own. Okay, but recognize that there's time involved here. Guess what? The problem of knowledge works exactly the same way on the other side. If you think that the other side, the other party, knows everything about you and everything about your motivation, guess what? He's wondering too. He's engaging in discovery as well. So this is the other half of dealing with the problem of knowledge. One is you've got to be committed to discovery. Number two is you have to be as explicit as you can be. If you want to help speed the process along, help the other party understand your motivations, your capability, what you're willing to do, and what you think the desired outcome is. I mentioned this meeting we had on Friday with a customer. This is exactly what we were doing. And we're not hiding anything, right? Negotiation is not particularly about hiding anything. If you're doing it collaboratively, you're actually helping your other party understand you better so that they understand how this trade is going to work. So that's the problem of knowledge. Let's talk about really big, hairy, audacious trading. My example for this is the Strive leadership team in July. So in July, Maggie came to the leadership team. How many, Maggie? 6 of them? 5 of them? All 5 of them. And she said, guys, we've got financing for a conference. We're going to do a conference. It's going to be in November, and this team is going to put it together. You can probably guess what some of the reactions were. They were kind of all a little bit scared about what she just said. We're going to do what? Okay? When you think about big, audacious goals, one of the big killers that I've found early on is that people who have avoided the idea of trading also start thinking a lot smaller. Because their first response to a really big, hairy idea is, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. And you can imagine if I'm calling up a speaker, potential speaker, and I say, hi, I'm a student from Strive. We're having a conference in November. Would you like to speak? You know, that's kind of your transactional model of training. What do you think they're going to say? What? Who are you? What are you talking about? Okay? This problem, this anxiety, is really easily curable. Break your trade down into subsequently smaller trades. Okay? And you know this kind of intuitively. You see this all over. If you go interview for a job, do you call somebody up and say, hey, will you give me a job? No. Hiring somebody is a pretty serious decision for a company, right? You have to care about capabilities, you have to care about motivation, and you don't know anything about that person, so you have to go do a lot of discovery. Investing to do a full discovery on every single person that comes in the door is pretty difficult, pretty time consuming. So what do? You break it up. Can you send me a resume? That's a trade. Great. Can you come in for an interview? That's a trade. Great. Can you come in for a site visit? That's a trade. All right. Companies do this already. You can do it too. So in the case of the Strive speaker, if you're a student, you don't know anybody who could speak at the conference. Well, the first thing you need is a list of targets. So what do? You go out and trade for those. So that's what those students did. They went to ARI, they found connections, they figured out who might be a potential speaker. They made a list, target list. They had to get trades for each of those in order to get that information. All right. The next thing they had to do was make some calls. Hey, I'm from Strive. ARI thought that you might be interested. We're a student leadership development organization based on the ideas of Ayn Rand. We're having a conference trying to share and spread some of the ideas of Ayn Rand and their application in the real world. We thought you might be a potential speaker. Would you have the ability to spend another 20 minutes with me, either now or at a later time, to go into detail, and I'll explain to you some of the detail and see if there might be a fit? That's a trade. I didn't solicit a speakership. I solicited a call, a 30-minute call. So a 5-minute call turns into a 30-minute call. Sometimes the person might not choose to trade. And then finally, after that 30-minute call, we can get to the point where the person might decide, yes, I see everything here. I've done all my discovery. I see everything. I'm interested. This is how you take really big, interesting, hairy goals and turn them into something. You start with small trades. Now, one thing I want to say is this is not a series of tasks. This is not, I'm going to do X, I'm going to do Y, then I'm going to do Z. Each one of these is a separate individual trade with a separate individual objective, meaning that you and somebody else are going to sit down and do something to come to an objective. And you're trying to convince people to do that. In the case of the list, you're calling people who are friendly to Ayn Rand and know and have networks of people and soliciting information. In the case of a call, you're calling people, giving them a very brief explanation and asking if they're willing to commit to another 30 minutes or so to do an explanation. Okay? So when you design these, you have to think about not the actions, not the task list. Set up the trades. What do you use to set up the trade? Go run the Sudoku on each one of them. Okay? You want to make an offer for turning a 5-minute conversation into a 30-minute exploratory interview? Run the Sudoku on it and write your offer from that. All right? Here's another little hack. When you have to move fast, and I'm going to ask you to put the diagram back up. When you have to move fast, what's one secret to moving fast in the world of trading? If the time crunch is on, you start with people who are already in that flow. Okay? Can you imagine if the students of Strive said, well, we're going to go solicit speakers for the conference. We're going to start by cold calling professors and saying, have you read Atlas Shrugged yet? Okay? So now you can think of an even bigger funnel for speakers that involves who's read Atlas Shrugged and who might want to read Atlas Shrugged and who's a sympathetic professor, somebody, a fellow traveler, right? If you want to move fast, the first thing that people do when especially startups, that they think about is not, oh God, I got to start at the beginning and we're going to have to do all this discovery. They say, how can I get somebody that's already halfway there and start there and move from there out? Okay? Really key idea in terms of moving fast. It also says that if you don't have anybody at the end, you're in trouble. If you have a really weak pipeline, you're in trouble. So one of the reasons you might consider the idea of networking, I know you'll hear about that all the time, right? Just to get a list of people that you could call if you want to start something, right? Hopefully every one of you who either saw the mentor list or the speaker list is going to take that email list home with you. Think of that as a potential next trade. You're off sitting and thinking about something you have to do with a career, and you say, you know what, I really like to talk to somebody who's in the industry. Who do I know, or who have I met once? Keep the list, right? You say, well, I don't know them. I didn't really talk to them that long. They don't really know me. Develop a set of trades to get you to the point where you can get an interview with them and have a conversation. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. So that's the problem of scope, big, hairy, audacious. Let's get back to those teams. Okay? So this whole time we've been talking about sort of this kind of model. And the reality is this looks really, really simple. What do you do when the model looks like this? And instead of 2 people, you have 10. Is that a trade? How am I supposed to draw that arrow? So the key to that is when you bring a team together, when you bring a group of people together, you do so for a common objective. All right? Let's go back to the Sodoku. We talked about this. We talked about outcomes before. This common objective becomes the linking feature. So it's no different than any other trade, right? The outcome is still the same outcome. But each person brings individual capabilities, individual motivation, and each person is going to do a whole set of actions. Why do you need this big list of actions that everybody does? Because that outcome is bigger, and all of those actions are going to add up to that outcome. Okay? Now, let's deal with sacrificing for the team. You have to recognize that everybody has individual motivations that fit within their own value hierarchy. They participate on this team because that outcome in some way serves their own individual motivations. If they don't feel that that's the case, they exit the team. And you can see this you see this in sports, you see this in jobs. We come in, we go out, it happens all the time. A very common misrepresentation or principle of leadership that's really, really poor is when you think that the outcome is the only thing that exists. I had a very interesting conversation yesterday about the movie Whiplash. Have any of you seen the movie Whiplash? A few. The antagonist in the movie Whiplash is a music director, a band director. And he rules his band with an iron fist. And you must proclaim and act in a way that you have ultimate and extreme loyalty to one thing, and that is his band. Okay? That is sacrificing for the team, and that is a terrible, terrible mode of leadership. Good leaders understand the outcome, but they also understand that everybody on the team has their own motivations, their own priorities, and they set up individual trades when they bring team members on and team members go. Okay? The military's done the same kind of thing. That's a lot of where this sort of sacrifice for the team in one team, and that goal is the only goal that exists kind of thing. And they're starting to figure out that it's not actually the right or the good model to use. Okay. So there's a problem in when things get that complex. And that problem is essentially the problem of knowledge writ large. And for some reason, I'm not moving forward. There it is. So if all of those actions add up to this outcome, and I have 10 members, 20 members, 30 members, I have to know how all of those actions add up to that outcome. And everybody on the team has to understand what their role is and how it's played, how it's going to play out. And the problem you get into is really one of orchestration when you're running a big team like that. If you want to put the diagram back up. Interesting. All right, it's there. So I work for a large plastics company. I'm currently running a project to turn around one of the units in that plastics company. The unit has not been performing as well as it could be, and we're essentially changing the strategy and implementing that new strategy throughout the business unit. That project is going to take me about 18 months to do, and it involves probably about 200 people. And what I've shown up here on the slide is essentially kind of a representation of the entire project team plan. Okay, every bar here is an activity or a task that some of the teams on the project have to do. Every red dot is either a milestone or a critical decision point that teams are driving to. Sometimes two teams will work together, sometimes other teams will work together. And the only way that we get to our final outcome is if that whole project comes off. I'm the orchestrator. Right? And one of the things you have to think about when you're starting to think about big goals like this is, how do you communicate, how do you help everybody understand what the overall outcome is on your team and what each of their roles, each of their actions does for that outcome. You can imagine if you're on a football team and you don't have a playbook, what that would look like. Okay? This is essentially the same kind of thing. And it's the same problem, the problem of knowledge, understanding what people's motivations are, what their capabilities are, and what they're supposed to be doing on that team. The other thing that you have when you get into really large efforts like this is working with agents. And some people use the term delegation. I don't like the term delegation because it seems to be kind of transactional. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Here's your job. You go do it. You let me know when you're done. That's not really what happens on big, complex projects. What really happens is you work with another person who is a trader in and of themselves, who then has the responsibility to go off and work up another set of trades with another team, but that set of trades is dependent or comes back into your project. So on this particular team, I have a team of 10. I don't know many other of those 250 people other than my team of 10. They know those people. Now, if you can imagine, if I set up that team of 10, those people are each people that I enter into trades with. I have to assess the capabilities of their team, and their capabilities as a trader. Hopefully you're starting to see a little bit of the complexity that goes on when you start thinking about trading and how it happens within an organization. If you now think about Apple and Steve Jobs, and you think about 100,000 people, right? Steve Jobs may paint the vision, but he has to be a master trader. And he's going to work through 5, 6, 7, 10 agents throughout his organization, and they have to be master traders, and they are going to work through another 5, 6, 10 people throughout their organization, and so on. A fantastic biography I recommend about Jobs is the book Becoming Steve Jobs, because it really paints his development as a trader. So everybody knows the stories about Steve Jobs' volatile personality and whatnot. The reality is he's probably always throughout his entire life had been a phenomenal innovator and creative thinker. For the first half of his career, he was a fabulously terrible trader. And the book describes his journey on the whole aspect of trading. And it wasn't until he invested in Pixar, and the CEO of Pixar became a mentor to him, and he saw how the CEO of Pixar developed his team and traded with his team, a team of very creative, very innovative individuals that he finally understood. And it wasn't until that experience that he was really ready to come back as the CEO of Apple, where he demonstrated both his incredible innovation skills as well as his ability as a master trader. hopefully you're starting to get a sense of this. This is the world that I live in, and when somebody says, oh, it's just a dog-eat-dog world out there, and businessmen have no interest in doing anything but raping the public, and the 1% make their livings on the back of the rest of us, this is why I viscerally respond to that, because it's not true. It's simply not true. The earth is round, and it's obvious. Okay? Last one, and then I'm done. Back to the Sudoku, one question. Where does the objective come from? Where does the objective come from in a trade? Who comes up with that? Mutually agreed upon. Well, who develops what it is? Somebody's got to propose it, and we have to agree upon it, but who develops what it is? It's a process, yeah? Yes? Yeah. So this is not trading. This is that individual creative spark. Okay? I don't have a hack for you here. I can't tell you what to do here, other than I think Hillel dealt with a lot of the what you put yourself in the context of to be somebody who's ready to respond when those sparks come. All I can tell you is immerse yourself in what you love to do. Listen to those little spark of ideas when they come, and you say to yourself, hey, I wonder what if we could do X, Y, and Z. And when they do, keep them alive. Run the Sudoku. Ask yourself in the next breath, hey, I wonder who would be interested in coming along on that really fun journey with me. And go find somebody to trade with. Okay? So that's all I have. If you want some good books to read, Atlas Shrugged is a book about trading. It's a book about what the heart of capitalism is. And if you read it, so I suggest that you read it and you run the Sudoku on every single relationship and every single trade that you see in there, and Ayn Rand will get it right every time. If the trades fail, the Sudoku won't work, and if the trades work, the Sudoku will work, and she'll show you why. A phenomenal book. A phenomenal book. And that includes your personal relationships. Okay, that's not just it's the love story too. The love stories are trades. Run the Sudoku on the love story as well. All right, that's all I have. Thank you very much. I ran a little over. Is there any time for questions? I'll take a question while Maggie's looking at her phone. Yeah.
So when you were talking about the Sudoku, I realized that I've actually been intuitively practicing something very similar to that.
Most people do. Most people will realize that they're thinking in that form.
I mean, I've been studying like business and negotiation and trade for like 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah.
It basically kind of developed me really similar to that. Not in those words, but it's the same concept. My question for you is how do you, what do you recommend to improve that process to be able to be quicker at coming up with ways to find ways to make the trade better for both sides?
Trading is a practice. I recommend doing it as much as you possibly can. There are lots of books I can recommend on selling techniques, and it depends on kind of which direction you want to have. Recommend that there's a ton of good science on this. It's just buried in different places. Books on selling, books on marketing, and again, I can recommend these. Interpersonal relationship skills, teamwork and leadership skills. Where most people have sort of felt some of these ideas before is when they work on teams and they really experience a good team leader, because a good team leader really does some of this contracting. In terms of jobs and getting a job and sort of the concepts around that, there's a really great book by Reid Hoffman. Actually, 2 of them. One of them is called The Startup of You. That's about the what if. The other one is the alliance, which really talks about reframing employer-employee relationships as tours of duty, essentially as a trade for a particular period of time, like a tour of duty. Yeah?
Okay, I noticed that everybody has probably worked in a group, where there's been like a few people who don't have that motivation or who don't have the capability. How do you get that to get to your outcome?
So there's a lot. We can probably talk forever on how to motivate people. Yeah, we've all worked on teams where there's people who sort of lack motivation or aren't quite aligned. How do you deal with that to get them motivated? So part of what I would say is understanding their motivation, and I talked a little bit about before, is not perfect. Some people aren't self-aware. They actually haven't thought about their values. They haven't thought about what they want to pursue. They don't understand necessarily how what they're doing fits in with the rest of the organization. Spend time in the discovery phase with people like that. And if they come to a point and they say, I'm still really not getting it and I'm not that enthused, then that's when organizations look at letting people go like that, right? Because it's not a fit, right? You've got a person on a team and their actual motivation doesn't fit. Their actual goals don't fit with what the team is doing. And sometimes you or the company realizes it before the person does themselves. And the best thing to do at that point is make the disconnect. Yep. Okay. Where's that?